Welcome back to Motors and Medicine. On today's episode, I'm going to be discussing my 21 Bronco 2-year review. This month, now November of 23, marks the 2-year anniversary since I took delivery of this Bronco back in 21. As you know, I ordered this Bronco from the factory, brand new, summer of 2020. Had to wait nearly 18 months before I actually took delivery. Summer 21, it hadn't even been built yet. In fact, my Bronco didn't go into production until October of 21, which actually was fortunate for me in that there was a certain number, a batch, if you will, of Bronco 2.7 engines that suffered catastrophic failures because of some bad valves. Fortunately, my Bronco was produced after that debacle with the valves. And so my Bronco now has 17,800 miles on it. And I have to tell you now that I have enjoyed every single mile driven in this Bronco. So what I wanted to do today was just kind of touch on how it's held up and the things that I still find very positive about the Bronco. And of course, some of the things that annoy me just a little bit. For the most part, by and large, Ford did a really good job producing this new Bronco that kind of has the retro styling. I was always a big fan of the old school 60s and early to mid 70s Bronco. They all had the same body shape. But that was like ultimately the best Bronco ever made, in my opinion. From a look standpoint, that is. And now, especially if you take one of those old Broncos and you modernize it with, say, a Coyote engine, modern suspension and whatnot, you've really got an incredible machine on your hands. But this particular machine, I've really enjoyed driving it compared to, say, a Jeep. Now, I'm a big fan of Jeep as well. I actually have a Jeep parked back over there, a Grand Cherokee that I'm going to be giving to my daughter as her first car. But from a perspective of off-roading, I think that this Bronco comes every bit as capable as a Jeep Wrangler, for example. Now, I'm a big fan of Jeep. I like Jeeps. The only issue I ever had with Jeeps was the fact that the live front axle made it a little bit less comfortable to drive. And this Ford Bronco comes with independent front suspension, which just makes it like driving a car. And it handles incredibly well. I remember doing a video early on where I showcased the handling ability of this thing with the all-wheel drive system engaged. I was able to take corners at like 50, 60 miles an hour, and this thing held. I was really shocked. I expected it to have a lot of body roll and just kind of be squirrely and just not very well planted. But the truth is that this thing has such a well-sorted suspension. Now, granted, I did buy this with the optional Sasquatch package, so it has really good Bilstein shocks and struts that work to kind of help sense the conditions of the road, help with handling and performance and that sort of thing. But beyond that, this vehicle has always handled exceptionally well because of that IFS. Now, furthermore, I have been extremely pleased with the capabilities of this machine. Off-road, as you know, I posted a video in Moab just a few weeks back, and this Bronco did exceptionally well. I took it on Poison Spider, which is a really difficult trail, and I also took it on Top of the World. And on those two trails, it just dominated. It did well. It did exceptionally well. I was very impressed with the performance, the abilities. It never once faltered. It never once gave us any troubles. Unfortunately, on Top of the World, I did get a little tiny bit of pinstriping on the side that I had to buff out with some rubbing compound. But outside of that, you know, the undercarriage took a little bit of a beating. And I am actually going to be doing a video on some armor that I'm going to be installing in the very back of the Bronco for something that was not covered in the past. But beyond that, off-road speaking, it has been an incredible machine. I've been very pleased with the interior of the Bronco. It's very comfortable. The seats are comfortable. As you know, I had installed some seat covers that we installed a while back. And those seat covers were made by a company called Mabit, I think that's how you pronounce it. Anyway, I've been so impressed with those seat covers and just impressed with the quality of the Bronco build altogether. From a performance standpoint, the engine has done exceptionally well. As I mentioned, some Broncos struggled with failing valves and ended up having like engine catastrophic failures. But by and large, most of the Broncos out there did just fine. So there's a lot of people that were dissuaded into not wanting to buy a Bronco just because they had heard about all these engine things and the potential for a big, large recall. But the reality is that there were only a certain number of Broncos affected by those bad valves. Beyond that, all of them were fine otherwise. Now, I do want to say that the 2.7 has been an incredibly stout engine. It has not had any mechanical issues. It's performed exceptionally well. I did add a few things that we're going to go into on a separate video. I'm going to go over all of the modifications that I did to the Bronco on a separate video and talk about how those parts have held up. But just talking just straight stock, the 2.7 has been an incredibly good performer. I feel that from a torque perspective, it has so much torque. I've never actually towed with this, but I have obviously off-roaded and just taken it down the road and taken it up the mountain and gone over passes and such and done long trips with it, and the engine has done exceptionally well. Always pulls. I don't have any issues passing cars or anything like that. It's got a real smooth transition in shifts. The transmission has worked flawlessly. This 10R80 10-speed in this Bronco has been an incredibly smooth transmission, even when it's cold. Now, my 2018 Mustang that I have, which I've done some videos on, has one of the first generation 10R80s. And that transmission is a great transmission. I did have to have that particular transmission in my Mustang. I had that tuned because I needed increased line pressure and different shift points because I was racing the car, roll racing and whatnot. But that transmission is very cold-blooded and it needs to be warmed up a little bit before it starts operating super smooth. The Bronco, on the other hand, the 10R80 in this, just even if it's ice cold outside, 20 degrees, it still shifts perfect. So I'm very pleased with that. From a looks perspective, the Bronco has held up. The paint on the Bronco has held up really well. I've been impressed with the finish. I haven't had to do any, other than things that I inflicted myself, I haven't had to deal with any blemishes or anything, even from typical rock chips and such, because when I bought this Bronco, I actually bought it with the PPF installed over the front third or fourth of the nose of the Bronco, which helped tremendously. But the paint quality, I was really surprised. It was much better than I expected. A lot of modern vehicles just don't get the best paint treatment unless you're buying something expensive like a Porsche or a Mercedes. But for being a Ford, I was impressed with the paint quality. Now, as you know, one of my gripes with this Bronco has been the windshield. And with any vehicle that's got a windshield that's nearly vertical and doesn't have a whole lot of slant, you're going to run into issues where you get rock chips really easy and then, of course, just cracked windshields. This is the third windshield that I'm on with this Bronco. Fortunately, with this particular windshield, I tried to take it a step further. I had an additive placed on the windshield itself. It's almost like a film to help protect. Now, I don't know, truth be told, I don't know how well that's going to work, but so far it has protected it from any cracking. I will say that. And then, as you saw in a previous video, I had installed this hoop surround, which actually helped protect from the side, because it seems like a lot of the rock chips that caused cracks were hitting the edge of the windshield, and that was kind of running toward the center of the windshield. But beyond that, the soft top has actually held up really well. I've had the soft top off completely. I've had it in 3/4. I've had it all the way back, and it hasn't really made any rattling noises, and it's kept a pretty decent seal. Now, keep in mind, I did add a bikini top that's permanently installed underneath the soft top just to help reduce the sound when you're driving down the road. But aside from that, the top has actually held up really well. I was a little skeptical. I thought that the top would start to show a lot of wear. And of course, I am parked in a garage, and I always am. But whenever I'm out and about, if it's, say, wintertime and it gets snowed on, or like when I was in Moab, it just got so filthy, but it washed and cleaned really well. Didn't have any issues with that. So I'm impressed with the soft top. And actually, if I had to do it over, I would have still chosen a soft top. I had originally ordered a hard top when I first purchased this, but there were so many delays and quality control issues with the hard tops. And from what I hear, they're still not perfect to this day. So I'm very pleased with the soft top. It's a lot easier to work with. It's easier to just put it back. And as you saw in a previous video, I bought a case, or like a holding bag, if you will, for all of the rear windows. And it's just slick. You slip everything in there, and it just gets placed over the back headrests. And then you can just get the top back as far back as you want from that point forward. Now, as far as braking is concerned, a lot of people mentioned in forums that the brakes on these Broncos weren't up to par. I'm here to say that I've been very pleased with the brakes on this. It's got essentially a 2-piston caliper setup, and I'm very pleased with the braking bite and the progression of the braking itself. I've got 17,000 miles. My brakes still have a ton of life left on them, at least halfway. And taking it off-road and having to stop this heavy machine. I mean, these Broncos weigh about 5,000 pounds. And then having to be going downhill on off-roads, the brakes have performed really well. And that's one thing, I'm a stickler about certain things. You know, being an enthusiast, I like things to look good, obviously, but I want them to perform as well. So I want the engine and transmission to perform well, the suspension, the brakes, and then of course I want the paint to hold up. So all the things that I've discussed thus far, I've been very pleased. Now, getting into the tires that came with this Bronco, these Goodyear, essentially Goodyear Wranglers is what they were. They just didn't put Wrangler on it because they didn't want to insult any Bronco buyer. Because it's not a Jeep, right? So these Goodyear tires have been okay. I will say that the tires leave a little to be desired. They're not the best, but they're also not the worst. I still have a fair amount of tread left on these tires, so once they're done, I'm probably not going to replace with these exact same tires. I'm probably going to go with something a little bit better. What I found with these Goodyear tires after these many miles is that they wear a little bit unevenly, and when you go off-road with them, I've noticed chunks of tread just falling off, which is just weird. It's almost like they're brittle when you go off-road with them, and that regardless of whether you air down or not. So the tires have been a little bit of a letdown, but I never had any flat issues or issues with valve stems or anything like that, off-roading or otherwise. So from that perspective, the tires have been good. Now, the engine, again, besides being a good performer, has not had any issues with oil consumption. None whatsoever. I've not had to add oil ever in between oil changes on this Bronco. Typically, I've been going about 6,000 miles per oil change. The Bronco says you can go 7,500. I typically go about 6,000. In reality, I'm probably going to go even less than that, maybe 5,500, just because I do off-road this vehicle, so it's a little stressful to the engine. But I've been very impressed with that. So no oil consumption, no leaks. There have been 0 leaks underneath this vehicle at 17,000 miles. Now, there's a lot of new vehicles out there that at these many miles, they're already leaking. Whether that be a Ford, Chevy, Dodge, it doesn't matter. A lot of the American makes, even foreign cars as well, but this has not had any leaks. And the undercarriage has actually held up quite nicely as well. Part of that is a result of the fact that I have the armor that I put on. But beyond that, it's just pretty strong. Now, I will say, one of the other negatives about the Bronco was the brittle front driver's side axle. And when I got into the forums, I did see that quite a few people had those driver's side front axles snapping really easy under some certain load conditions off-roading. Mine didn't break, but it got almost dislodged at the U-joint within the axle, the CV joint, if you will. and I actually had to take it apart and put a new axle in. When I did a video on that, trying to show, you know, some of the steps. I didn't go over all of it. But so the axle, the front axles, maybe they could be fortified just a bit. But beyond that, you know, I haven't had any electrical glitches. All of the screens work properly. I have had to reset the windows once or twice where they get stuck, because this particular vehicle has windows where when you have to pull on it and they drop just a little bit, and then when you close the door, the window goes up all the way. Sometimes that mechanism kind of gets stuck. And so resetting the windows on this Bronco has been pretty easy. I mean, there's a lot of forums talking about how to do it, but essentially you just push the windows down, hold the down buttons all the way down for a few minutes, and then pull it up, hold it up, and then it kind of resets the computer. Outside of that, I've only had to do that once or twice. I haven't had any weird noises, which a lot of people also reported with some of the early Broncos. And in the interior, I haven't had a whole lot of rattles develop. There have been a few squeaks, but I expect that because of how much flex the chassis has undergone with off-roading. But considering that I've off-roaded it, it hasn't really had too many squeaks or rattles develop on the inside, or the outside for that matter. It's still very smooth. Outside of that, I can't think of anything that's been unacceptable or that has not performed as expected, or not performed as Ford would have expected it to perform. So thus far, this is 2 years into it, 17,800 miles. Still have good tread on the tires, still have good tread on the brakes. Engine is running great, hasn't had any issues. It doesn't have any issues with oil consumption. Transmission doesn't slip. It works wonderfully with all different temperatures. The interior is held up great, no major rattles. There's a few things that I've talked about as far as negatives, but not very many. And then on the back end, the bumper itself has perhaps weathered just a little bit because it's made out of plastic. But outside of that, even the fenders have weathered just a little bit. And my solution to that has just been to use almost like an Armor All type finish on the fenders, and it brings back the shine and the luster. So outside of that, I've been extremely pleased with how well this Bronco has performed. So this does it for my 2-year review. Hopefully it will continue to stay together and function incredibly well as it has these 2 years now. We can put another 17,000 miles on it and see how we do. But on the next video, I'm going to get into all the parts that I installed on this Bronco, all the aftermarket parts. I'm going to make a big list of all the aftermarket parts I installed. And I'm probably going to have to make a list that I can physically read because it's had so many. And then I'm just going to talk about how each part has held up, and we'll talk about value for the money that I spent and whether all those parts that I bought were worth it or if I regret any of those things. But we'll do that on the next video. But if you like this video about the 2-year review, please give this video a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. I appreciate all your support, all of you who have continued to watch and support the channel. And like I had mentioned in a previous video, I'm still trying to get my subscribers up to at least close to 500 before the end of the year. Hopefully that can happen. But until the next video, this is Motors and Medicine signing off.